As a psychiatrist, I've gotten to really see where my patients struggle. As a neuroscientist, I get to bring those struggles into the lab and explore how to develop and test treatments to meet those needs. But what's a really big passion of mine is to bring those back, bring that full circle, and develop digital tools and ways and programs to help people at scale. Our perceptions of the world are shaped by our beliefs, our biases, our narratives, these stories that we tell ourselves, these worldviews. And I really like that Elizabeth came up with this powerful way to describe these universal truths around how we box ourselves in. So if anxiety, for example, or stress or fear builds these walls of this perception box, what keeps us stuck? Well, habits. We get stuck in doing the same thing over and over and over, even when we know they aren't good for us. They are our worldview in action. And one of the places that habits show up most often is in our health. So this is really important. We can start to see how these, whether they're physical or mental or both, how they relate to each other, how they interact. And importantly, if you think about this perception box, how strong are the walls of that box that we have built? So let's simplify it. Look at how the brain works. 3 key elements necessary and sufficient for a habit. You need a trigger or a cue, you need a behavior, and you need a result. From a neuroscience standpoint, we call this a reward because when something is rewarding to our brain, we learn to do it again. This is how we all learn. It's called reinforcement learning. This is how we survive. And survival is all about habits. Think of our ancient ancestors that are out there on the savannah. They've got to forage and find food. So they eat something, and their stomach sends this dopamine signal up to their brain that says, hey, remember this, right? Remember this context. So we learn, eating this type of food is good. And so we eat that food, we learn to eat that food again. We learn to go back to that source. That's called positive reinforcement. Something good, let's keep that going, let's do it again. We also have to avoid danger. So when there's a fear signal that comes in, we see the saber-toothed tiger, we run away. The behaviors that we run and the reward is that we don't become the eaten, right? We learn, avoid that part of the savannah. That's negative reinforcement. You can see it's the same process. It's just keeping things that are pleasant, pushing away or avoiding things that are unpleasant. And the problem is that we rely so heavily in modern day on this prefrontal cortex of ours. It's this thinking, it's this rational, it's this willpower, cognitive control part of the brain. It's the youngest part of our brain from an evolutionary perspective. And it's the first that goes offline when we get stressed out. The problem is that we're trying to solve this from the same level of consciousness that created it is not helpful because it can trap people in their perception box. So we started studying something back in the day, nobody even knew what it was, mindfulness. And if you think of simple definition that John Kabat-Zinn put forward, it's about paying attention in the present moment, but bringing this curious attitude in instead of judging what's happening, right? And so we started something that seemed really crazy at the time. I said, if you're going to smoke, go ahead and smoke, but just pay attention as you smoke. And they started coming back over and over and reporting something very interesting. Here's an example. This person said, mindful smoking smells like stinky cheese and tastes like chemicals. Yuck. So I didn't tell her to stop. I didn't tell her all the bad things that could happen later in life when she smoked. She knew all of this stuff. But I started leveraging that reinforcement learning system. I said, if you're stressed and you smoke, pay attention. And she started to see, cigarettes aren't actually that great. This gave us a signal that there was something really powerful that could actually help us step out of these boxes that we box ourselves in with. I'm a smoker. Well, maybe you're somebody that smokes. And then we could go from there. I won't go into all the details because we published our first study on this about 15 years ago now. But long story short, we brought in these practices, these mindfulness practices, and we compared them to the best treatment out there. It's the American Lung Association's Freedom from Smoking. Having people pay attention as they smoke and do some other practices to help them ride out cravings, we got 5 times the quit rates of this gold standard treatment. So it did look like we could actually use this wedge of awareness to break the cycle at its core. So I went back and looked at the literature, and I learned something really important, probably one of the most important things that I never learned in medical school. There was a guy, Thomas Borkovic. He put out this 2-page paper that said, hey, kind of worry might be important. It might be actually driven through negative reinforcement. And it might be driving anxiety. And I thought, wow, I never thought about anxiety as a habit loop before. But I know something about how to work with habits. So I had this idea, like, well, why don't we develop a program for anxiety to teach people these habit loops that are built around anxiety so that they can unwind themselves from those specifically. So what does it look like to build a digital therapeutic? Well, the idea is that, we can give people gradual trainings. We can give them short, bite-sized trainings. We can also have in-the-moment exercises so they can actually work with this in vivo. But importantly, as a scientist, I wanted to make sure, does this actually work? So we could do the studies. We started with anxious physicians. We just wanted to see if there was a signal. Well, we got a pretty good signal, 57% reduction in anxiety in 3 months. This gave us some pilot data so we could go do a randomized controlled trial. So we did one with the worst of the worst, people with generalized anxiety disorder, right? This is where people wake up anxious, they feel anxious all day, they worry that they're going to be anxious, they can't sleep because they're anxious. It's just nonstop. And when we added this simple app-based treatment to usual clinical care, we got a 67% reduction in anxiety. We got a 64% remission rate. If you think about this, worrying, that's a big thing that builds us and keeps us held in this contracted, perception box. So we're seeing as people learn to look in, they learned that they could actually they didn't have to react to their emotions. They didn't have to suppress them. They didn't have to push them away. They didn't have to run away from them. They can actually be with their emotions. And long story short, when you do all the math, it shows that when we get increases in emotional non-reactivity, it reduces worry. When we get reductions in worry, it reduces anxiety. So we're seeing that we can actually start to break down these walls of our perception boxes. As we box ourselves in, the more we worry, the more we push away our feelings. Instead of pushing them away, we can turn toward them. So just summarizing all of this, right now, what do we know? We know a lot about how we learn, how we form habits. This reinforcement learning process is actually pretty well worked out. We also learned a lot of science about how this reinforcement learning process is working and how we can actually help people step out of these habit loops. The problem here is that digital therapeutics are largely static delivery of content. So we saw some nice results, but we're not actually as good at meeting people exactly where they're at. I'll just tell you a story of something that just happened to me as I flew to LA. I was sitting next to a young woman. She was a little nervous, looking around, fidgety. We start to descend into LA, slowing down, and then suddenly the plane goes like this and takes off. Like the dude floored it. She looks over at me and she goes, I'm really scared. I turned to her and I said, okay, there's this practice called 5-finger breathing. Let's do it together. You trace your fingers as you pay attention to your breathing. Breathe in, pause, breathe out. And you can see over the course of 5 breaths, somebody has traced their fingers. It's a really nice way to kind of reboot the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex because we can't hold a bunch of information in our brain at once. She does this the rest of the flight. We land. She turns to me and says, thank you. I'm so glad you were sitting next to me. But the key is, not everybody's going to sit next to a psychiatrist on the flight. What about all the other people on the flight, right? So what about having a doc in your pocket, right? What can we do for that? So what we're doing now is leveraging the strength of large language models to make these next generation of customized interventions. So these can be personalized, they can be conversational, meet people where they're at. So what are they trained on? And this is what we're going to work through together. So there are these 3 steps of habit change. And it's about being aware. The next step is exploring the results of our behaviors. Third step is also learning how to step out of these habit loops. See how many times you go, oh no. And then see if you can bring some, oh. Judging is about locking ourselves in our perception boxes, right? Getting curious is a way to get that key to open the door and step out. That's your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to start to map out these habit loops. See what type of perception box you have locked yourself in. And just notice what it's like to know that you have one. if you didn't previously.